Hi and welcome to Lead a Horse to Water, the equine training and behaviour podcast, and I'm your host, Trudy Dempsey. This is a little bit of a departure for me because I'm videoing this time, and I am in future going to upload podcasts with video where I can, and we'll share them on YouTube as well if that's where you're used to getting your podcast downloads or you prefer to view on YouTube. You'll be able to do that. I'll put some links into my social media areas so that you can find them easily. What do I want to talk to you about today? Well, again, I'm running solo, and I think as I go forwards with the podcast, the majority of my episodes will be me running solo, which is both good and bad. It's a great way for me to be able to communicate exactly how I feel about topics without having my brain jammed into a format of asking questions of somebody else and bringing that forwards. It's also a lot easier for me to just fire up the machine and start recording when I'm on my own. When I have to plan somebody else coming on the podcast, there's a lot more work involved. I will still be doing that, and I have some guests coming up that I'm really looking forwards to, but majority of the time I'm going to try and regularly post some fairly short episodes which will just be me explaining some things, and they will be things that are coming up in my daily life, mainly centered around horse training, of course, and things that pop up in situations when I'm working with a client, because I think that's what people want to hear about. They want to know what's happening with their horse and why I might feel a certain way about the way I train things. So this time I'm going to be talking primarily about why I sometimes don't suggest that people start clicker training. And it isn't just sometimes, actually, it's a lot of the time. And I want to explain my reasons for that. And I want to look at that in terms of some previous students in the last maybe 6 months, a year, for whom I haven't suggested they reach for the clicker. They've been quite keen to sometimes, and they'll be really looking forward to getting stuck into what is shown in the general media as being fantastic. It's positive, it's a great thing, there are no downsides. So first of all, I want to say that when I'm training, I always automatically am going to be looking at how I can add positive reinforcement. But because my skills have been honed over dozens of years, I feel quite confident that I can reduce the frustration that a horse new to positive reinforcement clicker training might feel. Those frustrations are all about context, about the horse feeling that in that context of training they should be getting food, and then picking up on the things that we don't want them to pick up on. We always want them to hear the click and know that they are going to get that for offering a behavior, but in reality, is that really happening? What happens when you're mucky, when you're doing something else and the horse is more interested in watching you than they are in listening for that click? How many of those little chains of behavior get set up in those situations where the horse thinks they're learning something? You've no idea that's what they're learning. And so those are the situations I'm going to try and avoid with learners, the human learners, but also for the horses. I'm really looking out for those horses. How can I help those horses? Well, when I'm training, I'm going to go super slow. I'm not going to rush. I'm not going to get out my clicker first. I'm going to look at that horse. I'm going to look at it living its best life. I'm going to make sure that it's got the best situation it can have to make learning go smoothly. Because if there's a problem with the horse, if the horse is hungry, if they're frustrated about not getting enough food, or if they have resource guarding problems with their buddies, then learning is not going to go smoothly. So whatever I do, whether it's positive or negative reinforcement, we're going to have a kickback all the time with that horse finding it really hard. So I want to make sure that, first of all, and I say this all the time and I don't apologise for keep saying it, I don't just look at what can I train this horse to do. I look at how is this horse living their life right now, and can I make that horse's life better for them before we start thinking about training. And the answer is often, in my case, I'm super lucky, that the horse is living their best life, because people often find me because they've already been digging into how to make their horse's life better. And so for them, the potential for adding clicker training is just one little thing on top of everything else. And so normally when I go to see those clients, they're already offering an amazing situation for their horse. But They don't have a poor relationship with food yet because they might not have yet picked up the clicker. Sometimes they have picked up the clicker, and really then my job is that bit harder because I've got to dig back in and say, okay, how can we change this? We're not just adding the clicker and the understanding and association of the clicker meaning food is coming. We're not just looking at that. We're looking at unpicking behavior already if they've already started to dig in. Recently, I went to a lovely client who hadn't touched anything, and she said to me when she contacted me, I don't want to get it wrong. I really don't want to get it wrong. So what's the first thing I do when I go to see a client like that, who is offering their horse just the best situation they could possibly have, and sensibly they've said, actually, I'm not going to get started until you talk to me and tell me if I'm in the right sort of ballpark with how I want to train. So I arrive and I take stock of the situation the horse finds themselves in, and I'm helped with that by the history form that I've already asked the client to fill in before I go and see them. So I know how that horse is living its life, and I'm really comfortable that I can make decisions for training based around that. But now I can actually see that. Obviously with online clients that's slightly different, but you very quickly build up that same pattern of information when you're working with somebody online. Through videos, it's really easy to pick up on those things, as well as the history form. So when I arrive at a student like this, I have to think on my feet. I always say to my husband, it's a bit like being an actress. So you stand up in front of somebody who's watching you and wants to drink in everything you're going to say. But at the same time as doing that, you've got to think of so many other things. So you're up there on the stage in front of, it's only one person, sometimes it's more, but normally it's in front of one person, and your brain has to be going through the processes. And I've often spoken on the podcast about the fact that I am everybody else's plan. But when I'm the one that's thinking of what we're going to do with that horse, it's my plan and my brain, and I have to communicate this to the client. It's not easy. It's quite a lot and quite involved. So I make a decision quite quickly based on what I first see. So the first thing I'm going to ask a client to do is show me what you do now. Show me why you want to use positive reinforcement, clicker training. Why do you think you want to use it? So I'll ask them to perhaps lead the horse, or if they're working at liberty, just to walk a few steps with the horse and stop and then walk again. Something really super simple. And from that, I can get a feeling of whether we are in a good place with training. And you know how I feel about this. I feel very strongly that horses want to do things with us. They like interacting with us. It's why horses ended up being domesticated, because they're quite straightforward and they quite enjoy time spent with us, and they're inquisitive and curious. And if we can make the training curious and bring out that curiosity in them, then it's a win for everybody. They're going to enjoy the training and we're going to enjoy the training. So the first thing I do is that little test, see what the client brings to the table already. And 9 times out of 10 at that point, if I'm seeing a horse that is super relaxed and happy to be around their human, but is maybe just getting a little bit confused about what's being asked of them, I'll think about how can I improve that right now before I add food to it. So we might run through some, well, if you stood here, if you let the rope a little more through your fingers, if you don't try to manage your horse too much, just think about taking a walk with a friend. I'll do that. We'll start to tweak what they already have. And then when that has been tweaked, and there are so many tweaks depending on the particular client, it might be, as I say, changing sides, it might be the way they hold the rope, it might be the way they take a step forward, it might be cleaning up their cues, because everybody likes to think they've got a verbal cue. We might say, well, your verbal cue is not actually working, so let's move your feet. And if you move your feet, does your horse move their feet? Perfect. We're getting there. And then I might go into my behavior builder system for those people, which means adding some food, but not in a clicker training way, not in that precise way that can be really tricky for a new person to take on and do well. And so we'll end up with working maybe a halt, go to a bucket, take a little walk, go to a bucket, and we build up behaviours that have some motivation and some food added. And normally, if I can, I'm going to be the one that loads the bucket. So there won't be food in the bucket unless Trudy drops it in. And Trudy will only drop it in when the client is happy with the behaviour that they've seen, and they use the bucket cue, and I step forwards and put the food into the bucket. It's not perfect. There are difficulties with every single training system we use. We need to be clean and clear, and we need to be certain that the horse is listening to the handler as opposed to listening to my body language and seeing what I'm doing. So that makes it a little easier because the person is no longer thinking about carrying food. They're not having to think about pressing a clicker at a certain time. So that's a really nice, easy introduction to the human who knows very little about clicker training, has watched it on the internet and sometimes seen some ears back and grumpy horses and thinking, is that really what I want for my training? So that helps them begin to place this idea of the ABC that those of us who love behaviour and training understand, that antecedent behaviour consequence. The consequence on offering a behaviour is to go to the bucket and eat, but the person doesn't carry food on them. So it's a really straightforward way. But I'm trying to be as positive as I can and use as much positive reinforcement in that horse's life as I can as I introduce them to better clicker training. Now, some people have already been doing this for years with their dogs and they have great skills, and I can easily adapt those for them training their horses. And we do. I think the hardest thing at the beginning is for people to slow down and not want to get training too quickly. It's really tough. And getting that association, getting the start and finish. Now, how do I begin a session and how do I end it without frustrating my horse? I'm massively into keeping frustration low. And I think that's why I feel this way about clicker training with horses, particularly with horses, is if we're ending up with very frustrated horses around the food, why would we be doing it? How are we going to sell this to anybody? And it's perfectly brilliant as a way to train horses. We just have to be careful that horses aren't getting that stress around the training, which is something we just do not want at all. Now, how can I put that within a LIMA framework? LIMA, least intrusive, minimally aversive, and as an IABC certified equine behaviour consultant, that is my starting point. So I'm always going to be looking to add positive reinforcement to training. But if my horse is getting frustrated when I'm training, why would I use positive reinforcement just to frustrate them? To me, that is the first thought when we're training within a LIMA framework, because LIMA is all about keeping things low stress for the learner. So if you introduce stress in your first session and then continue that through all your clicker training sessions, where are you? Why are you doing it? So I'm always looking at what can the trainer themselves do. If it's me, I'm going to be looking always at positive reinforcement based training. We know it can't stay within that narrow band, but I'm going to try and keep it within that quadrant word. I'm going to always be focusing on how can I create behaviours in a positive reinforcement based way. For other trainers that I'm going to help, I am going to look at what their strengths are. Are they brilliant at negative reinforcement, and could I actually improve their skills there before I add the positive reinforcement, and do that in small, manageable chunks for the human? We're always talking about splitting things for the horse, but how often do we think about splitting things for our human part of the equation? So that's it. I think that's what I wanted to say. That's why I don't always just go straight for positive reinforcement for adding food and a clicker in the most accepted sense of it. I always want to move my students to using as much positive reinforcement as I can until they're at the level that I am at, that I would always opt for a positive reinforcement based creation of behaviour wherever I can and maintenance of that behaviour. But I think we have to be honest, and I'm fed up with the clicker training world not being honest, just showing when it looks great and everything is hunky-dory. So I don't want to bring into that frustration that horses will feel because their owners, trainers, guardians are feeling uncomfortable too. I really want everyone at the party to feel like it is a party and they're having fun when they're training. And sometimes adding food doesn't bring any fun. In fact, it just brings that other F of frustration. I hope you enjoyed this short. They're mainly going to be short going forward, so I might sometimes link a topic as I have in the past. Let me know if you like the video or you couldn't be bothered whether it's video or not. And let me know if you have any questions about this. It can be super lonely on the end of a podcast, not quite knowing what people are thinking. So send me questions, Trudy@Equine. I know it's a weird email, it sounds funny, but Trudy@Equine.training. You can send me any questions or comments that you would like to. I'm happy to dig down into topics, and indeed I'll dig down into this topic further if that floats your boat. If not, expect to hear from me in a couple of weeks when something else piques my interest, and I'll fire up the kit and get recording again. You can catch me coming up in March, beginning of March, Understand Horses. I have a webinar with Justine Harrison. We're going to look at trainers and behaviour consultants and where the line is drawn between them, the similarities, the differences. I think it's going to be a really good one. So get onto that webinar. I also have one at the end of March, and that is with World Horse regular webinars. They do these once a month through the winter months, so that's World Horse Welfare's regular one, and I'm really looking forward. Again, Justine is going to join me for the Q&A on that one, but I'm going to be looking at introducing the ideas of the quadrants. I'm going to try and bring a little bit of more basic science to it, because this is an audience that might not understand some of these techniques. So it's perhaps not one for you guys who listen regularly, but it could be one for those of you who have got friends that you want to push in that direction. So I'll be looking at riding horses and the application mainly of positive and negative reinforcement, but also why we shouldn't be adding punishment to our toolkit and how we can do things a lot better. So join me for that one. That's at the end of March, and so much coming up. I'm going in May to the IAABC Foundation conference, so I will be there. Come and join us in Colorado Springs if that's your thing. The horsey bit is all on one day, which I love, so you get to have a whole line of horse talks in one day on the Friday. But also on the Thursday we have a great practical, so that's separate, and that will be off campus for the conference, so it'll be on an external site, and we get to play with horses and hopefully involve you. I'm going to be presenting with Gabriel Lencioni on that one. So lots coming up. I Understand Horses, I have a lot of things coming up later in the year, and of course the IABC Foundation. Gabriel and I have a cooperative care course that's coming up at towards the end of March, I believe. So join us, join me. Look forward to seeing you on another episode very soon. Train kindly and effectively, and have fun. See you soon.